Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about whatever I want. But it can also be whatever you want. So you can call and join the conversation, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. Just for those that are kind of new to the program, we generally are trying to discuss economic and financial issues that may have an impact on how your life goes here in Stewart and some of the things that may affect you here in Martin County, whether it's local or whether it's national or international, some of the issues that are going on, because they all have some sort of a tie. Ultimately, some of the things we don't think will ever get back to us do get back to us, and it's kind of interesting to understand some of these things and just discuss them and see the pros and cons, what's going on. It's not political, but it is political because all this stuff becomes political. But we try to keep it more economic based, a little more not financial planning, but financial based in terms of cause and effect, outcomes and expected outcomes, things like that. So it's not purely a political rail, but sometimes we talk about some of the politics behind some of the decisions are made and why those political decisions will be good or bad based on the economics of the transaction. So anyway, it's kind of a just a general discussion type program, and we do welcome some comment and in. You can call in. Mike will take your call. He'll screen you out and probably not let you on. But he's real tough. He's you got to give him a name, and then you can pretty much get through. But 220-9788, 220-WSTU. So, Mike, what kind of things? Now, Mike, for those that don't know, Mike is relatively substantially younger than me.
Relatively.
Yes, he could be my son. He wouldn't want to be. Nobody wants to own me, but nobody wants to take credit for me. But he's about that age. He's about the age of my son and daughter. So, like, I know, right now, one of the things I worry about as a father and a grandfather is some of the financial burden and economic burden that we're placing on the next generation. So, I know you're pretty politically astute and you get involved in a lot of things. I mean, you pay attention, you
try to.
you do news and all of those kind of things. So you're kind of up on that type of thing, but just generally, and I know I hate it when people say this, but when they ask you to speak for a generation, because everybody in your generation is a little different. So they're all people, so they all have
How
different.
dare they?
Yeah, right. They all have different opinions, but you kind of still probably fall into the millennial category almost.
Elder millennial, yes.
Elder millennial.
Yeah.
So you're kind of in that category. So you're the worthless, lazy, doesn't want to work, doesn't want to do anything type person, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you make up that portion of the
Yeah.
population?
Look, I showed up 3 hours late to work today.
I know. Geez, I can't believe what a slacker.
I know.
I mean, the fact that you were like in Orlando at midnight has nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
But,
deadbeat.
And the fact that you work a couple different jobs and all those kind of things, you're just lazy.
Yeah.
But
too lazy to get a good job.
That's right. Too lazy to get a good job. If you hadn't gotten that liberal arts education that you got, you would actually have a good job. But and that's an interesting thing we can talk about too. But as a younger person, what kind of things do you and your wife worry about? What's the kind of things that and what is it? What kind of things do you feel like you would like to be doing but can't, either because you just don't have the money to do it right now, or the time in your life, or whatever. I mean, and whatever you don't want to share, of course
No, that's fine. But I would say the number one thing that kind of jumps off the page is I would say I'm starting to get there, but I've been there for quite a while. It's that feeling of I'm behind the ball on saving for retirement, and I know that it's something that I should be throwing more money at, but I don't know where to, like, I've poured through our monthly budget, and it's like you have that target number of what you want to put aside every single month, and then there's the realistic bills that you're facing every month, and those two numbers can't meet up,
Right.
of the, I want to be saving X number of dollars a month for retirement, putting that away in an IRA, a 401k, whatever that number, whatever your particular system is, or even just throwing it into other investment portfolios. I know what that number is for me, what I want to start at, and I know what my monthly budget is, because that's the one thing my wife and I have been pretty good at as a couple, is our budgeting and making sure that we still spend money silly. We still have our silly purchases.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we know where every dollar we make has a role. It's going out to something. And we've cut a lot of our silly expenses down to the bone in many ways. So it's not like I can sit there and say, all right, well, we can cut out the cable, and then we can not eat out to eat 5 nights a week, and we'll start cooking more, and we'll do this. And we've already done all that easy stuff to save the money. And so I think the number one thing for me and a lot of the people that I know is the saving for retirement.
Yeah.
We're starting to get to that point in our lives.
Alan, and I think, and coupled with that, it's the burden that you have in terms of Social Security, because you're paying Social Security, and the reason you're having to save.
Well, I make so little; it's such a small payment.
Yeah, and you're all off the books on everything, so you just don't declare.
Exactly.
But yeah, so that's pretty typical, and your retirement number is bigger because you, I'm sure, like a lot of young people, you're not factoring in Social Security at all, probably for retirement. You're probably saying, I don't think it's going to be there. And so I want to make sure I have enough money saved to cover my retirement.
Well, you obviously, I mean, part of your job, I imagine, as a CPA is helping plan for retirement in many ways. I mean, so like you obviously have much more base knowledge than a lot of us. You sit there and you start to think of it and you just go, I know I should be doing this, but I don't have the knowledge to know what I should be doing.
Right.
So you start scrambling. It's like, okay, well, I know I need an IRA, so let me get an IRA going. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know really what's involved with it, but I know that I should be putting money aside into that IRA every single month. What job offers the 401k and matching? So, okay, I'll put X percentage of my thing there. And you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that 60 years down the line it sticks.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because it is kind of probably 60 or maybe more for you. When you start talking about when somebody's in their 30s today, and 90 is going to be young. I think by the time you guys are 90.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in fact, it's funny because I was having a discussion the other day with just looking at, for older people, long-term care issues. And again, this is not a financial planning show, but I think it's important to kind of, these are some of the basic situations that are causing us to worry about what's happening nationally, and some of the things that are happening nationally is that, you're looking at long-term care. So for somebody who's 65, for example, 64, somewhere in that range, their health insurance costs are pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, substantially higher, probably the same as somebody who's 30 and has a family, almost, in terms of the trade-off there. But then when you reach, 65, you got Medicare, and then you can get a supplement, and that supplement might cost you $400 a month or something like that. And you've got pretty good healthcare coverage. So basically, for $400 a month, you're going to have pretty good healthcare coverage. Whereas now, I might be paying $1,100 a month. So you're making up ground there, but now you've got to deal with long-term care. What happens to most people that I know that are my age, in our 60s. We don't want our kids to have to take care of us, that because they're already taking care of the rest of the world. They're taking care of through Social Security and all of the things that they have to fund, and healthcare that they're probably going to have to fund in their lifetime, and that kind of thing. They're already subsidizing the older people. And
mm-hmm.
I think, people my age, again, in their 60s, they tend to not realize that as much. I think that's, and it's causing a little bit of a generational divide to some degree, because I think that a lot of people, are not realizing the burden that they're putting on the younger generation financially. Between and you mentioned, I said I'd come back to is was school. School. Well, do you have school loans? I mean, I think all of the young people that have school loans that are in their 30s and 40s still don't have them paid off, because the numbers are so big. So between school loans and education, and insurance and retirement and Social Security burdens and all of the things that you pay, that's not even talking about your income taxes to support all of that. And then I look at our generation and there's no way we've paid in enough money to the Social Security system. I enjoy hearing all the time that people will say, I paid into this Social Security system my whole life and it's my money and I deserve to get it back. Well, you talked about what you do with your money and how you would invest it from a retirement standpoint. Well, I can tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't stick it in a mattress, right? And everybody's that's right. Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
The one thing you don't want to do, because everybody understands the compounding effect, the time value of money, right?
What is it called? The rule of 7?
Yeah, that's right. And basically 7 years, you can double your portfolio. So the stupidest thing you could do is not invest it, is to put it in a mattress and just say, I want to keep it safe, so I'm going to put it in my mattress. Yet the federal government did that with Social Security. They didn't invest it. They took it and spent it and said, we'll give it back to you later. And they basically borrowed from that Social Security fund.
Yeah.
And with no interest.
My understanding is you go into the halls of Congress and there's a big drawer, like a metal drawer, and it's labeled Social Security funds, and you open it up and it's just a bunch of handwritten IOUs that are in there on scraps of paper.
They're in the form of a treasury note, of a 10-year treasury note, but that's exactly what they are.
All right.
They're promises to pay yourself from yourself.
Yeah.
It's not really worth a lot of money,
And the way that I understand it, if somebody were to say, I paid into it, that's my money. I was like, well, you paid into it so that previous generations could take money out. And your money's gone. It's already spent.
Right.
It's my generation now that's paying for the next generation.
Right.
And then our kids are going to be paying for us and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And so from a planning standpoint, as the older generation, what we should be doing is what we've been doing for years as parents and saying, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? Because, and you think they're asking that question because they want grandkids.
No,
they're asking that question because they need to know who's going to fund their retirement.
Yeah.
So, but seriously though, it is a problem. I mean, when you look at that, there's no way that if you look at the money we've put in, there's no way that the money we've put in comes anywhere near what we're going to draw on as we pull out.
And it was designed for people to only live a couple of years on it,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Not you retire at, what's the retirement age? 65?
Well, now it's 67 for you.
Okay.
But it's for people in my age, it's going between 60. It went from 65 to 67. So right now, for example, I am born in 1955. So I am 66 and 2 months.
Oh, it's on a sliding scale like that?
It's on a sliding scale until it gets to 67. So if you were born in 54 or you would be maybe 66. And if you were, I don't remember exactly where they go. And if you're born in 57 or 58, you might be 66 and 4 months or whatever the numbers are. But yeah, they're sliding up to 67.
But then the life expectancy is in for another 10 years.
At least.
Because the life expectancy is now is like what, 78?
Well, see, that's the funny thing is your life. A lot of people don't realize it. Life expectancy goes up the longer you live. It sounds like a Yogi Berra thing, but it actually is.
I mean, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's actually true. So if for you, for example, for a male in their 30s, if you go to, your life expectancy is probably about 80, 87, 80, 87, 88, I would imagine, somewhere in that range. And that's because that life expectancy takes into consideration other things than normal, some people will die as a result of an accident or an injury or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So wars and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting because wars help pare down the retirement population. The original retirement was for returning war veterans, who most of them wouldn't have survived, and those that did wouldn't have lived long, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you've got you've got it's based on, it's about 87. But right now, for example, once I reach 66 or 67 when I retire, or 70 when I start drawing, my life expectancy at 70 will probably be somewhere around 86 or 87, even though right now it's probably about 84, 83 or 84. So the longer you live, so if I was 80 right now, my life expectancy would probably be 90. It creeps up. It doesn't go up year for year, but it creeps up as you go. And what's happening is that we have more and more people. Like you said, the system was designed. The system itself, that Social Security was based on, was originally drawn up. Was originally developed for the Germans. It was by the Germans, I think. And again, I might not be 100% on this, but as far as where, when, but I know conceptually what it was. It was a military. They had a bunch of people coming back from the war, and there was they couldn't get jobs because of their age. And in those days, it was not even 65. I don't think it was, younger than that. And so what happened is, the bulk of the people that were coming back were expected to die within a year. So they were providing this welfare benefit for them. And that's what it was. It was for health and welfare. It was a welfare benefit to care for the military troops that had been off at war and didn't have an opportunity to put money aside or anything. And so the government, in an effort to kind of take care of them, it was a soldier's benefit is really what it was. And it was for men. It was a soldier's benefit. So, but it was designed so that you didn't ever pay any money back. In fact, I think the original one, the people would die 2 years before that they would have to make a payment. So there was almost no chance that they were going to have to make a payment. You still had to work until, you still had to come back and find some way to survive until they started paying out, and most people would die in that interim. So the Social Security system was modeled after that. So the original retirement system was based on the fact that your early retirement was 62, and you had normal retirement and at 65, and that age, which has never changed until just recently, we're trying to scale it up to 67. Now, this is based on the original institution of the Social Security system, was based on the fact that most people would be dead by 66 or 67. It was, in fact, actually, it was even before that. So the original system was a shell game. And actually, when you think about it, the politicians were pretty smart. They promised a benefit, right? They take money from you to pay for that benefit. And in those days, you actually would provide. Like you said, it was kind of a shell game, and it was kind of a thing where you were providing for the other people that were already retired. But the idea was that by the time you reached retirement age, there wouldn't be any, you wouldn't reach it, you would die. So the retirement age of 65 was like 2 years before, the person was, or 2 years after the person was expected to die. So life expectancy was like 63 and you were 65, or it was 65 and life expectancy was 67. So it was like you had somewhere 2 years worth of benefits. That is all it was.
Right.
It
not 2 decades.
Yeah, not 2 decades. Right. And so, and even then, a lot of it was based on men. Now think about this a minute. It was because in those days, it was men that were in the workforce primarily, not women. And so the Social Security benefit was structured so that, and that's why the wife got the husband's benefit, got half of the husband's benefit, because women weren't working. So they weren't paying Social Security. these were supposed to be supplemental retirement programs. So there was no intention for it to be your full retirement, right? It was supposed to be somebody that worked, that put a little bit aside just in case. A lot of it was for if you got disabled or something happened to you before you retired. That was the Social Security disability system. And so, and it changed and got modified over the years with, and it got substantially expanded during the Johnson era. We all know that. But part of that was we had a war going on. A lot of people didn't think that, that people would be living long after that because of the casualties of war and some of the illnesses that people have after war, whether it's drug addictions or PTSD or whatever. So anyway, it was all a system that was based on never having to pay. So that's why the government could take the money. What they really were doing is saying, okay, we're never going to have to pay this out anyway. So let's just borrow this money now and use it, right? Because we need it now for all of these other things we want to do. So let's just borrow it. We'll give them a note. We'll pay it back, with inflated dollars. So we won't really owe them anything, but it's not going to be a problem because they aren't going to need it. Mm-hmm. It's supplementary. And frankly, most people will be dead by then. And now here we are with a lot more women in the system. Okay. So that messes up the numbers because they live longer. So what we either need to do is have women have more vices so that they die earlier. Or, think about it. Even the percentage of women that smoked versus men that smoked in those days, men smoked a lot more than women, even though they didn't know that it was going to cause problems. As they got older, they did. So the life expectancy of women has always been higher than men. And it like say long-term care, the average length of time that a man is in long-term care is about 18 months. The average time that a woman is in long-term care is over 4 years. So, it's almost 3 times as much time. So now what we've got is a system that really is kind of screwed up because of the funding. The funding doesn't work now when you have to pay out. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the any kind of Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi schemes don't work when you actually have to start paying out. When there's less money coming in and more money going out, that's when Ponzi schemes fall apart. And I think we all really know that from a practical standpoint, if Social Security was in the private sector, it would have been shut down a long time ago as a Ponzi scheme. It really is. It's taking dollars from the younger people or from the newest people coming in and paying out a smaller amount to the people that are already in the system so that they get a return on their investment. And then as long as you keep getting more and more dollars coming in to fund those people that are in the system, it works. But as soon as there are fewer people joining the Ponzi scheme than are getting paid out on the Ponzi scheme, it doesn't work right. And that's why the funding doesn't work right. It has to be, and it has to recognize, and this is a long-term thing. Like you're looking at planning for retirement. We're talking about people who are already there. Like for example, at my age, 64, I can't really change. I can't change anything. I can't go back and start, saving for retirement at 20. But frankly, I didn't have any money to save for retirement at 20.
Yeah.
But
most people don't.
No, most people don't. Now, I could have been, I was in your situation back in my 20s. I remember that by the time I paid my rent, and I didn't own a home, by the time I paid my rent and even before I had kids, that I could go to Baskin and Robbins once a month. That was my big deal. And, you'd spend money on ice cream and that was it. But we ate at home. We didn't eat out, none of that type of thing. But there was no money left over, and so you start looking at some of that and there was no money to save. And part of that, frankly, was because the Social Security system was taking out my Ponzi money. And, if they would have taken out my money and not put it in a Ponzi scheme, had they invested it in in just the overall stock market, let's just say it had been invested in the S&P 500. So for your information, what do you do with it? Just put it in the S&P 500.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Just put it in the S&P 500 and just leave it there and
It's
don't
the
worry
Warren
about
Buffett
it.
model.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what happens to it. So just put it in there. By the way, Berkshire Hathaway is one of the ones in the, we talked about that. It is one of the ones in the S&P 500. It's a part of the S&P 500.
Nice.
So you're actually investing, not only is it his model, but you are investing in his company, which is in that if you're in the S&P 500.
I love the story of the $1 million bet with Warren Buffett.
What was that one?
All right. So he placed a bet that he could have more success putting his money into a S&P 500. What is it? A mutual fund where you just basically it buys all the stocks in that portfolio and just sits on it. He's like, if I could put my money in a low cost S&P 500 mutual fund, I'll have better returns over a period of time than a high priced broker who's wheeling and dealing and making all the trades and making all the moves. And somebody took him up on his offer. And I think it was a 10-year time frame. And Warren Buffett crushed it. His mutual fund that he just put the money in and never touched it again for the next 10 years made way more in the long run than the other one.
Yeah. It's funny. It's exactly right. And that actually, like I said, it's not really an investment show, but it is from the standpoint of, when you're talking about retirement, the key is to invest often. That's called dollar cost averaging in the investment world. Invest often, regardless of where the price is. Hold long term and don't look at the fluctuations. Don't worry about the fluctuations unless you're near the point where you're going to have to start drawing on it at retirement. And then let the compounding, keep reinvesting, let the compounding work for you, and diversification. The S&P 500 or something like that, so that you've got a diversified portfolio, and if you leave that in there for anywhere between 13 and 16 years, you probably will never lose any money, no matter when you invested and when you did it. It's kind of inert. Now, I can't prove that statement. And if I was an investment advisor like Ray Lucia, I would get in trouble for it. That's what happens. Anytime somebody actually figures out how the system works, I hate to be a conspiracy guy, but whenever somebody finally figures out how the system works and is doing it right, like Lucia was doing with his buckets of money and the concept that he was using, all he was using is a concept, and it's standard investment theory, although he's refined it a little bit, is that you put money into the stock market, you leave it there for somewhere around 13 years, and then and over that 13-year period of time, you may be moving some of that into liquid funds as you need it. All right. But generally, you're never moving the money out of the long term until it's grown to the point that you've got enough in there that you need to reallocate. And then you have a short term bucket that is for your spending. And that number's a bigger number if you're retired, because you don't have income coming into that. But so you got a short term number that you're trying to provide for you're basically spending your principal, but you're spending it on the expenses that you need. And then in between, the bucket number 2 is a bucket that provides a combination of growth and income. So what you're doing is letting the money spill down. So you're taking the equity funds, you're leaving them there and saying, I don't need to touch those for at least 13 years. And then as the opportunity arises, you move some of those funds into the second bucket, which has some investment inflation protection, but it also provides some yield. For example, rental income, whether it's REITs that you can buy, or rental income, or oil and gas type things that tend to appreciate and also provide cash flow, or annuities that tend to appreciate and provide cash flow. So they're in that bucket 2. That's the hardest bucket, by the way. And then bucket 1 is just money market accounts, cash, short-term investments that you can get liquid and spend when you need it. You don't need much in that. So you're skewed towards the long-term bucket when you're not retired, like young, like you. And then as you get closer to retirement, the money's funding more down towards those second and first buckets. But you're always putting money into the third bucket and leaving it out there so that it's going to grow. And so it's kind of a, it's just a general fund. Right now, and this is another alternative for somebody like you, they have what are called lifestyle funds. And the brokers aren't really thrilled about them yet because, first of all, they have a higher cost than than the S&P 500. You put money in an S&P 500 mutual fund, and you're probably talking about 10 basis points. 10 basis points is 1/10 of 1%. There's 100 basis points in 1%. So when you hear brokers and investors talk about basis points, that's what they're talking about. Tenths of a percent is what they're talking about. So 1 basis point. So it costs you about 1 basis point. So if you're earning, a 6% yield on that, that's costing you almost nothing for your investment. So anyway, that's the concept. Because the other thing that makes a difference in retirement investing is low cost. If you can keep your costs down. For example, if Social Security Administration could keep their costs down, if they could find a way to reduce their administrative costs, that's something that when you're dealing with retirement dollars makes a big difference. Social Security hasn't managed to do that yet. They still have a pretty big overhead burden, which is coming out of those investing dollars because you have to fund that. It's the same thing with your retirement. If you're paying an investor like Buffett was talking about, if you're paying a broker, they have to earn a higher yield because they have to get paid, right? Because it requires active management.
Mm-hmm.
So now, for those that are in the investment world, you understand that to get a higher yield, you have to take more risk. So also what Buffett did is not only did he beat the person that was doing that, but he beat it by being safer. He took a less riskier approach because he bought just a general diversified portfolio that didn't require any management. That's a very conservative versus somebody who's trying to pick stocks and bonds and make gains and produce income off of a trading process. Particularly when you take into consideration, I think historically, if you missed, I think it's 7 or 10 trading days out of the last 30 years, you missed all of the run up in the market. Now think about that a minute. If you were out of the market on 7 or 10 days, not at a time, in total, over the whole period of time, you missed all of the up market.
How is that possible?
Because what happens is that the market tends to move when people don't expect that it's going to move. So a lot of those days when the market has moved up like that and you've missed these big gains, 400 points, 500 points, now 1,000 points or whatever, people have pulled out and gone on the sideline. And they've already taken their loss because the market's crashed on them. They've taken their loss and gotten out. Only temporarily. They're going to go back in, but they can't stomach the loss. So they pull the money out, even though they haven't lost anything yet until they pull the money out. But because it's their retirement money in particular, and that's what the market is. The market is mostly retirement money. It's mom and pop. It's the unions that have their money in it. It's not big wealthy individuals that are affecting the market. But what they do is they pull that out. Now the market runs up 10 or 20%, 30%, all of a sudden at one time. And there's been some really big moves after some of these. And all the money's on the sideline. So so all of a sudden, as it runs up, that's people trying to get back in. But by the time it happens, you've made a big profit on the deal. But if you were on the sideline, you made none. That's the same reason that people have lost 40 or 50% in the last crash. They lost 40 or 50% on their stock portfolio when the market was never down 40 or 50%. It's because the market was down and then up and then down and then up, and they got in and out at the wrong time. You can never, and that's what Buffett's point. You can never beat Wall Street. The game, it's a rigged game. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's a rigged game in favor of the house, and the house is Wall Street. So you can't beat it. You've got to participate in a diversified manner. So if you can't beat them, join them. That's really what you're doing.
And I know that in terms of that concept of that he was talking about with the S&P 500, it had something to do with, there's a period of time. I don't remember what that is, whether it's 7 years, 10 years, 15 years or whatever, but you could take that time frame and compare at any timeline on the S&P 500 and it would show a rise, as opposed to individually it's going to go up and down, but over that long-term trend, it's always going to go up.
It's interesting. And this is what got Ray Lucia in trouble. And Ray Lucia is a Ray Lucia Sr., who's no longer in the investment world. He had a show on TV, and this is what happens as these guys get to be more popular and as they promote things that are actually pretty good ideas. For example, Edward Jones got into difficulty on because they're a buy and hold type firm. So they don't churn stocks or anything like that. Their whole concept, in fact, when you become part of Edward Jones, they have you make, I think it's like 10,000 cold calls, because they want you to constantly be generating new clients, not trading on the existing clients. Edward Jones' philosophy is not to have 5 clients that have $100 million a piece and you just keep trading their portfolio. Their concept is if you had 5 clients that had $100 million, you won't make any money because they're never going to do anything. They're going to buy $100 million worth of stocks and leave it there for the next 20 years. And so you're not going to get any trades. And they're commission based. They weren't, percentage based. They were commission based. So the concept with Edward Jones was a good one, but they were a good target, because they're not as big as the big firms, the Merrills and all those. The government never goes after the big firms. If they do, the big firms just pay the penalty and everything goes away. Nobody ever hears about it. Nothing changes. But if it's important to the big companies, if it's going to put them out of business, for example, they have more money than the U.S. government. I mean, they really do. And they can go after them and they can litigate that case and you will never win. So the net effect is that, and let's face it, the brokers have in every one of their contracts that you have to arbitrate the answer. And so that helps them too. That keeps them from spending millions and millions of dollars because arbitrators aren't going to give the awards that an individual might give in court, So the bottom line is that the system is the FINRA and the SEC, they never go against, they're never going against the big companies because that doesn't make sense. But they're not going to go against mom and pop because that doesn't make sense either because it doesn't get any attention. So you have to pick the firm in the middle or the individual in the middle that's popular enough that everybody knows who they are, but not big enough that they can afford to fight you. Edward Jones, for example, was a good target for FINRA on a technical violation that really wasn't a legitimate violation. I don't think. I mean, it wasn't taking advantage of anybody. But it had to do with marketing costs relative to funds and not taking maximum advantage of buying the same fund. If you're buying a Century 21 fund and all of those funds have it. So if you buy one of their other funds, you get a discount, right? So the government got on Edward Jones because they didn't buy another Century 21 fund. They bought some other fund, American fund. Well, if you're thinking about it from an investment standpoint, do you want to have all your dollars in one fund? But, and then also, we understand Edward Jones was getting some marketing fees when they do reach certain thresholds in a particular fund because it makes sense for people. It's the best fund out there, lowest cost or whatever. So they're buying it anyways. But when they reach a certain point, they get a benefit from that. There's a marketing benefit that they give them, like a bigger commission type thing. And they didn't disclose that to the investor. Well, who cares? They don't even read. You give them a prospectus, they don't read it anyway. The SEC thinks they read all that stuff. The investors never read any of that stuff. The brokers don't read that stuff. I don't know anybody that can read those financial statements. But anyway, the bottom line was that Edward Jones got hit for that because here was the deal. Edward Jones is a partnership. And so, and they're out of Missouri, Midwestern value, do it right, okay. But a big splash because they knew Edward Jones couldn't fight it because if they did, it was going to cost each individual partner, the little broker in every city, and there's only one in an office, it was going to cost them like $1.5 million a piece if they lost. So what they have to settle. They have to settle because they can't. It was going to be a personal thing. They would have had to pay personally. Their insurance wouldn't have covered it. So that was a target. Raymond James was a target back in the day and it wasn't even anything to do with investment, because Raymond James, Tom James, was one of the first ones to come up with the concept of paying the broker not a commission, because on commissions the broker makes money whether you make money or not, win or lose. They came up with basically requiring that all of their people earn a fee, so you get paid a percentage of the portfolio. The logic behind that being that if you do well for your client, you'll do better, and if you do worse, you'll do worse, right? So you can't just bet it all, hope that you win, and then when you don't, sell it and get out. The standard practice in the industry for a long, long time, and I say that this is you go to a financial advisor, and this is our fault as investors. We go to a financial advisor, we say to the financial advisor, here's $100,000, see what you can do for me. And if you do well, I might give you some more. Well, I don't know how much more. Is this 100,000 and they got 12 million? And what am I trying to beat? I don't know. So like I said, if you came into me as an investment advisor and said, here's $100,000, I may have more for you if you can show me how you can do. I'm gonna take the 100,000. I'm gonna spend $500 is all I'm gonna spend. Spend $500. I'm going to get on a plane out and go to Vegas. I'm going to put $100,000 down on double zero and hope the heck I hit. And if I do, then I just got to worry about hitting double zero again the next time they give me more money. But if I don't, sorry, I got money anyway. I had my chance, but I got some cash. I wasn't going to get the rest anyway because I didn't produce a big enough return. So, what the hell? It works out. And that's really what you're telling your financial advisor. When you don't tell them your whole picture and you don't tell them how you're invested, you're telling them, go to Vegas and put it on double zero and see how we do. Because you're telling them, unless you produce a return better than everybody else, and I don't know what else you got, and I don't know how risky this money is. If that's $100,000, and I wouldn't really go put it on double zero because I would get arrested, right? But I would do the investment equivalent. I'd buy futures. Just buy futures. Those are huge. That's huge leverage on futures. You're going to make big money if you're right. You make big losses if you're not. But what the heck? And so that's the kind of thing you're telling your investor. What you're telling them, your investment advisor, is that this 100,000 I'm giving you is play money. So put it where you would do with play money. Well, in most planning models, play money is at the top of the system in terms of the smallest percentage. It's 4 or 5% of your total assets. And once you've lost that 4 or 5%, you don't get it back again. You can't just put in 4 or 5%. So if I looked at that and somebody gave me $100,000 and said, do what you can with it to get me the highest return so that I can get the account, I would assume that that's their discretionary money and it's in their top 5%. So I would figure that if they gave me $100,000, that they've got at least $2 million that they're investing, and probably more than that. So, so it's kind of an interesting process, but they picked on Raymond James for that, but they got them for mortgage transactions up in the Northeast that was being run through some of their independent brokers. Had nothing to do with the philosophy, but it was sanctioned in Raymond James. It told the market, these guys are not good. They did a bad thing. Well, they didn't, but they wanted to make a point. They wanted to make a point. They wanted to do something. And they picked somebody like that because now all these other places were doing the same thing, but they were too big to do that and they would have fought back.
Don't they own the Bucks?
Who?
The Raymond James.
They have the stadium over there. I don't know if
they don't have the team.
I don't think they have the team.
Okay.
But you could be right. I don't know.
Because I was going to say that's got to be bad advertising too.
No, it's really bad. They should be sanctioned for that alone, right? But yeah. So you've got that. And Lucia, what I was going to say with Lucia is he made the comment, just what you were talking about, that you were talking about Buffett. It was if you take, you'll have brokers that'll tell you or advisors that'll tell you, oh, here is my, here's my return, right? Or this fund produces X amount of return. Well, what your return actually is depends on when you got into it specifically, what day. In fact, I saw an example one time that if you got into a fund, okay, if you got into a fund the day before we had one of those major crashes, it would take you about 11 years, 12 years to basically get your money back. You know what I mean? It would take that long a period of time. So whereas if you bought the day after the market crashed, you had this huge return over a 10 to 12 year period of time. Lucia's point was that if you could hold it for 13 years, no matter what day you went in or what day you went out, you would not lose money. Your return might be different, but you would not lose money if you were in the market for a 13-year period of time from anywhere and you went in and out. What happened is, Lucia had been talking about that for some time. I went to his seminars and heard that. They came against him and wanted him to produce the documentation to show that. And he couldn't produce the documentation, I guess is what it amounted to. Or the documentation didn't show it was 13 years, it was 16 years or whatever, you know? So they got on him for basically promoting that and that being wrong. As an investment advisor, they sanctioned him for that, which is crazy. The concept is still true. Whether it's 16 years or 13 years or 14 years, the fact of the matter is that if you leave your money in long term, you're not going to get hurt. It fluctuates, but as long as you don't take it out, you'll ride through that market and it'll correct itself. And that's actually, and so that's the concept with Social Security. Had we left money in Social Security in anything instead of taking it out, we would have plenty of money for retirement. With the amount of money that's being taken out, if you think about it, there's 15% of your salary is going to Social Security. 765 by you, 765 by your employer. All right. If you're self-employed, you're putting the full 15.3% in. If you invested 15% of your salary every pay period into an S&P 500 fund, that earned, let's say, 5%, think how much that would be. It's an amazing amount of money. If you make, let's say you make $5,000. Let's say you make $5,000 a month, which is, between various sources. Let's say you make $5,000 a month between you and, let's say, your spouse, or you individually, you make $5,000 a month. That's putting in $750. 15% roughly is $750, right? You're putting $750 a month. Run $750 a month over the next 50 years or 60 years at even a 4% return. You're going to have a couple $1 million by the time you're done, at least $2 million. And that's just by putting that money aside. Now, there's no way, you're putting aside $750 a month and you're putting it aside. So you got $1,500 times 6, you got $9,000 a year. You got $9,000 a year. You put it in for 60 years, that's $540,000. That's the Social Security funding method. They took that money, they didn't invest it, and they're giving it back to you, and it's $540,000. That doesn't even cover your long-term care. That doesn't even cover your long-term care number. But had you invested it in anything that earned 4 or 5%, that's nothing. Historically, the market has yielded 6 to 7% over time. So I'm talking about almost, half that. If you invested at 4%, you're going to have a couple $1 million in 60 years. Easily a couple $1 million, probably more than that. And so
what's the historical inflation rate number?
Historically, it's down around, I think it's down around 3%, somewhere in that range.
Because I guess the idea would be, whatever you do, you want to make sure you're making over that 3%, right?
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're essentially losing money.
Right. But
not really, but
yes, you are. And exactly, and you've hit the nail on the head. That's how the government made money on Social Security. Because if they borrow from Social Security at no real cost, okay, then they don't pay you anything. That what they're going to do is they're going to pay for your retirement at decreased dollars, because inflation, they didn't allow for inflation. So if they take your money and they give it back to you later and they don't allow for inflation, then they've got less dollars to give back to you. The problem is they're paying you out based on inflation. So they were giving you an inflation adjustment as if they were earning 2 or 3%, and yet they didn't earn anything. So in the example we're talking about, if you lived 40 years past the retirement date or 20 years, 30 years past the retirement date, you're in the hole. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting concept. And it's something to look at, but and it kind of is, it's just something for you to think about in terms of Social Security and about the young people and the burden that they've got, because they can't afford to not put the money away because there's not going to be enough there to pay. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on another show, maybe get into some of the macroeconomics instead of the microeconomics of that process. But for today, I think, any of you out there that have an interest in discussing the topic, join me next week here on Wednesday, 9 to 10 o'clock, and we'll talk about those things that affect you in your life right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's very, very, very old station.